Hey guys, this is Chris. I wanted to make a quick video about 4 RPGs that I feel fix D&D 5th edition. Now I know that's kind of an incendiary title, and I want to offer the following disclaimer, which is I love D&D 5th edition. This is my player's handbook. It is well worn, it's well used. I play D&D and I run D&D 5th edition more than any other game, by far. And I have a lot of affection for this edition of D&D. That being said, I'm sure that I'm not alone in encountering aspects of D&D 5th edition's design that I wish were implemented differently. And I think that there are a lot of RPGs that address certain aspects of 5th edition and might be a better fit for someone who's been playing 5th edition and is thinking to themselves, man, I really wish that this particular thing was done better. Now, the first thing I want to address is combat. I'm sure if you've played D&D 5th edition, you've had the experience of being in a combat with your party and realizing that you are mathematically likely to win. Like, your party's definitely going to win this combat. However, the combat is just a slog. It's just taking forever to just whittle down the remaining enemy NPCs or enemy monsters down to 0 HP. We've all experienced this, and it can really sort of ruin the cadence or the pacing of a game session when you have a laborious or tedious combat session. There's a game developed by a 4th edition D&D game designer called 13th Age, and it's very, very similar to Dungeons & Dragons. It's a D20 system. It will feel if you're a 5th edition player, you'll feel mostly at home in this game. What this game does in terms of combat that might appeal to someone who feels that the combat in 5th edition is kind of sluggish is that it has a mechanic called the escalation die. And the whole premise of the escalation die is as you're playing through a combat, the die corresponds to sort of the attack bonus that you get, and it increases as the combat progresses. And so what happens is that you get better and better at the combat. You're more likely to land blows. The combat basically it basically gets you to the point where the monsters are dead quicker. Another game that you might want to consider if you find D&D 5th edition's combat wanting is D&D 4th edition. Now, I think you should look at D&D 4th edition if you really like the wargaming aspect of 5th edition. If you love your combat miniatures and you love grid-based combat and you love strategizing and theorizing about how you're going to... If you love the puzzle of resolving a combat encounter, if that's your jam, D&D 4th edition is where it's at. D&D 4th edition really nailed the wargaming aspect of D&D, and it's much more balanced than other versions of D&D, but some people didn't like the fact that it was so game-like when it came to the combat portion of the game. There's a lot of sort of underlining discourse about whether or not games should do this. Like, some people think that combat should not really be a separate mini game within D&D. And when you think about it, why is combat subject to these unique rules that don't apply to any other aspect of the D&D experience? Like, there isn't like a special set of mechanics for buying something in D&D. Yeah, you can roll persuasion or you can try to barter when you're purchasing something, but there isn't like a specialized mini game for the act of purchasing something in D&D 5th edition. But there is this very elaborate combat mini game that exists for combat in most editions of D&D. Well, D&D 4th edition really doubled down on that minigame, and it really made a high-quality experience for people who love that aspect of D&D. There's a great video by Matt Colville. I'll link to it down below, where he talks about the merits of D&D 4th edition, and he talks about the sort of surrounding debate around 4th edition and why it was kind of dragged through the mud a little bit. It was a little maligned, I think, unfairly. He thinks unfairly, and I think unfairly. So I think that if you like the wargaming aspect of 5th edition, you will love 4th edition. Another thing that people might take umbrage with in a game like D&D is the magic system. There's this kind of, I don't want to say paradoxical, but there's this weird thing that happens when you have a well-defined, well-regulated magic system where magic suddenly doesn't feel magical anymore. It feels like this scientific process that you can perfect and completely understand. And when you have a magic system that's consistent with well-defined rules, it's better from the perspective of game balance and from the perspective of I'm going to create a character and I'm going to have this sort of I want to have a good sense of what this character can do. It's better from that perspective, but from the perspective of evoking the power and the mystery of magic, having a really well-defined, or rather having a hyper-predictable magic system can actually remove the feeling of magic or the impact of magic in a game system. I think a system that does a good job of preserving the mysterious and unpredictable feeling of magic is Dungeon Crawl Classics. This game, really beefy core book here, by the way. What I love about Dungeon Crawl Classics is it has these extremely detailed tables for spells. Every spell has a table in this game. And what ends up happening is when you cast a spell in this game, you roll the appropriate die, and your spell's effect will vary depending on your result. And the effects can be pretty dramatic. Like, you can actually lose your spell. You can actually lose the ability to cast a spell forever. You can get like a souped up version of the spell. You can get like a version of the spell that like does damage to everyone around you. You can have a highly effective version of the spell. Like, it really helps you feel like, or rather it helps preserve the feeling of magic being genuinely magical and unpredictable and chaotic and powerful. So that's wonderful. That's a really cool thing I love about DCC. So if you're looking for a more unpredictable, more chaotic magic system, I would look into DCC. The final game that I want to mention, and the final aspect of D&D that I want to sort of address in this video, is role-playing. There are a lot of people who play 5th edition, and, you know, they like the combat. The combat's, like, okay to them. But what they love the most about combat, or what they love the most about D&D, is the role-playing. And they wish that the game better supported, better justified, better enabled role-playing. I think a game that does a good job of this, but still feels very D&D-like, is Dungeon World. Dungeon World is made by Adam Kobold and Sage Latora. It is a descendant of another game called Apocalypse World, and it's within a family of games called the Powered by the Apocalypse games. And what's really interesting is that some of the fundamental underlying assumptions of role playing are challenged here and are reframed and redesigned here. You know, this game is really a conversation between the dungeon master and the players, and the players have a lot more agency, a lot more control over what's happening in the game. This is a really, I think it's a great game, and it is very, very different from D&D 5th edition, but it's worth checking out if you really love the role-playing aspect of 5th edition. So that's it, guys. I hope this video was insightful and not too incendiary. One thing I want you guys to take away from this video is you actually don't even need to switch to these games to get value from them. You can mine concepts, mechanics, spells from any of these games and bring them back to your 5th edition game. Or you can switch over to these games. You know, there's nothing preventing you from doing that. And you should feel empowered and free to play whatever game you want, to meld whatever games you want. There might be some adverse mechanical consequences to mixing and matching games, but you know, that part of the fun is just trying stuff out and seeing what works for your game. So I hope this was a useful and clarifying video for you guys. Thank you very much for watching.